Okay.
All good?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. This is a new edition of our Product Apéro, and tonight we are super glad to welcome Chantal, the brand new head of product operations at Decathlon. Congrats. Yeah, Chantal is visiting us from Paris, and she will be talking today about, well, you see the title, strategies for product managers to deal with digital transformation. The format will be pretty much the same as the usual, so we're going to have a talk for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then some Q&A so that everybody can get their chance to ask questions to Chantal. And then at the end we will have some extra drinks and pizzas.
Oh.
Chantal, yes. Chantal, okay. The floor is yours.
This just got me motivated. All right. Yeah, thanks so much for coming out tonight. And I'm really keen to get chatting with you about this topic. So what I wanted to share tonight are two things. So one, get to a common understanding about what we understand as digital transformation, because I hear a lot of kind of corporate kind of speak about what that is, and I feel like we don't enough chat about what that looks like in reality. And so I try and talk in kind of plain language and kind of real life experience about what that means. And then I've got some kind of tips and things I've learned in different approaches to how to deal with this kind of environment as a product manager or product leader, in terms of three things: building your resilience in this kind of environment, how important it is to get stuff done, and how to kind of some kind of tips to get there, and also collaborating specifically with business, so with the kind of the rest of the organization that may also be kind of needing to adapt to this new way of working. So a little bit about me. So yeah, as you said, so I've just been nominated named head of product operations at Decathlon, and until now I was a group PM, so a leader of a product team. So I've been at Decathlon for about 2.5 years. So I'm based in Paris, but most of our teams are in Lille, and then we also have an office in Amsterdam. So kind of in the general area of the north of France, let's say. So I've been working for about 10 years in product across some B2C, some B2B, and also lots of internal products, especially in large organizations. Started working in product in London, so for about 6 years, and then I've been in France for the last 4. It wouldn't be a Decathlon introduction without telling you what my sports are. So I'm really passionate about nature, so you can see me here in my kayak. But that's a bit far from where I live, so what it more looks like is walking in the woods in the kind of Paris area. Also, I do yoga and running. And then my other passion is product communities. We have quite a close-knit community in Paris, and so I'm super excited to meet people here, because kind of new discussions, I'm sure, and probably lots and lots of things in common. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey, and it'll become clear why I'm talking to you in this way. So I looked at kind of where I've worked in terms of when the organization was created. So I started about 10 years ago in an NGO. I was kind of doing product management, but also kind of really scrappily. Then I worked in a legal tech B2B SaaS business as a PM on mobile and desktop. And then I moved into the public service, and I tried to find the date it was created. So it was kind of in the 1850s. Nobody really knows. So that's a kind of the civil service of the UK for the entire 4 countries. And then when I came back to France, I worked in a games company, Ubisoft, created in the 80s, and now I'm at Decathlon, and we're nearly 50 years old soon. And why am I saying this? Is because when I realized, what was so different in terms of working at these places versus these places. And it wasn't really just a question of scale, because these were kind of smaller, we were like 30 odd and 100 odd, and here we're more like 10,000. I don't even know how many people are in the civil service, huge. And then Decathlon were around 100,000. So huge companies, but then there was also something else that was different. And that's because when they were created and when their initial structure was built, is that the internet didn't exist, and lots of opportunities that existed in digital just weren't a reality. So we're still working on the foundations of a company that kind of was built in a completely different era. And so that's what I kind of started thinking about when, okay, what does it mean working as a PM in this kind of context? So just that quick show of hands of who works in a company undergoing transformation. What would you say? All right. Well, I hope, I'm keen to hear, maybe in the chats afterwards as well. I hope I don't scare the people who don't. So I want to talk about a bit what it looks like. And firstly, what it looks like from the perspective of a user. And I want to use an example from the public service on the apply for a passport service, because I thought it was something that's kind of probably most people have gone through. So it's how to get your passport. And this is what it looked like before. So you used to, you go to an office, they tell you all the documents that you need to provide. Then you go and take photos in the lovely little booth. You get the documents that you need, your birth certificate, I don't know what, all the things. You drop off those documents at the administration again. You probably need an appointment for that. And then eventually, a few weeks, months later, you pick up your passport. So that's what the completely offline process used to be like. And then we had a sort of phase of digitalization. And I specifically use this word, and you'll see why. And what happens is that, so I go online, it tells me, okay, to get a passport, you need to provide these documents, and here's a PDF form that you can download and print out and fill in. But then you still have to go and take your photos, you have to go get the documents, or maybe ask them from different government authorities. And then you have to drop off the documents and then eventually go and pick up your passport. So really, you kind of think like, oh, this institution is doing things with the internet, but actually all they've done is really fix step one, but nothing else. And this is what a digitally transformed service looks like for the user for the apply for passport service, which is that it's an online form where you provide all your information, everything that the passport office needs to know. You take a photo on your phone with a feature that helps you figure out how to use kind of the right kind of, or take the right kind of picture. And then you upload your documents and you pay online. Or maybe the administration already has those documents. And you pay online with a government payment service. And then you receive your passport in the mail. So it's an amazing service. That means you don't even have to leave your house to be able to kind of go through that process, and extremely reduces the time for all the administrative staff. But this would never have been possible without de-risking each of these steps, both through doing extensive user research and user testing and iteration. So we didn't go from the kind of completely offline model to the completely online model. The delivery teams and loads and loads of people worked on this service over the years. They kind of started with one bit, then adding another bit, and then adding another bit, especially taking a photo on your phone, figuring out how to guide the user through those steps in a way that would be acceptable for passport standards was extremely tricky, right? So keeping that in mind, it's our product ways of working are really necessary to be able to go from one to the other. So that's what it looks like for the user. But in terms of thinking about companies, here we talked about a public sector example. So we want to make government more efficient, we want to reduce costs and things like that. But actually for many companies, digital transformation is also a matter of survival, because you're competing with people, with companies that have been built way later than you. They have a digital infrastructure, a data infrastructure that's much more efficient than yours, and they're able to innovate faster and come up with new services faster. So that's why it's also a really important thing for us to be thinking about. And then so inside a company, what do we hear being talked about? So one of the lines that we've been hearing about is kind of digital is the business now. I know that was kind of a tagline. I don't know if some of you have heard similar things, which meant that we were going from IT as a service provider. So basically where the budget was given to the marketing team, and then the marketing team could decide to give some money to IT to then build a CRM for them. And so it being a cost center. To then digital, no longer IT, being a value creator, being a real business unit that has its own budget, that can decide on the priorities it's going to tackle, and also demonstrate economic value it brings to the company. So that's the shift we're kind of seeing and we want to be seeing and talking about. But really what it looks like is this, is a sort of back and forth. We're seeing different parts of the organization transforming at different speeds. Like for example, so we have a range of different products that range from managing our supply chains and to having an e-commerce website. On e-commerce, clearly it's much easier to demonstrate your business value, and so it's much easier to adapt new ways of working. You're working on a legacy software based on SAP, managing your supply chain, a lot harder to kind of get things moving and also to kind of get to a place where it's the kind of product ways of working that we'd like to have in place. And we also see, you know, the reason is not just slow, it's also the back and forth, because we have seen shifts of where we've gone like, yes, we're all product managers, we're all going to be working, you know, doing user research and all this. And then they realize, whoa, this is really expensive. No, let's go back to projects. And so yeah, we're a little bit in that phase, we're kind of seeing a revival of the project, especially since last year. So it's interesting. And then so what does it look like for PMs? These are kind of things that we hear. So people regularly encroach on my scope. I spend more time having to explain my job than actually doing it. We wear jeans and they wear suits. They want me to work on Microsoft Teams. Our budgets are defined 18 months in advance and define what we're going to build. I have to report on release plans. And I have to fight to really do product management. So, and stakeholders still tell me what features to build. So I don't know if this seems familiar, but it's the kind of frustrations that happen. And so that's, in this section, so I tried to kind of describe what I understand by transformation in that kind of environment. And we can't really change the circumstances that we're in. I mean, we have to a certain degree accept that this is the reality. And instead of saying, oh, I'd love this mountain to be flatter and the conditions to be less icy, let's think about what is the gear and what are our methods we need to actually navigate this environment. So I have as I said, three different aspects in which I want to share some approaches. So one is about resilience, because as I said, it's a very much a long-term game. You kind of have to stay really motivated and on track to go towards a different way of working over the long term. And that's why I said you have to have high expectations, but keep them on the long term. We've seen people come from the startup scene into a big organization and get really frustrated really quickly because they're expecting things to happen fast, for decisions to be made quickly, for people to accept change, and actually that doesn't happen. And they're actually frustrating everyone around them as well, because so I'm not saying don't have high expectations, but think about them over the long term. Keep your goal up over here, and then kind of get closer and closer and closer with every step you can. And kind of keeping that mental image also helps me keep sane. That I'm not saying, yeah, I'm not where I want to be. I don't have enough user researchers on the team as I would like to have. But I know this is where I want to go, and every opportunity I have to get closer to it, I will try and use it. And to help you keep going, and that is, it's really important to be a weak signal spotter. So being very aware of where you're starting to see little grains of change. So that could be a stakeholder, for example, that says, oh, I think we should do some user research, they might get it completely wrong. They might just say things, they might have an idea or be really biased in what they're thinking about. But at least they're showing a sort of openness to maybe a different way of working. They're adopting maybe your vocabulary, or let's do a retrospective, or those kind of things. So seeing openings to be able to kind of move them along on that way towards where you want to be in terms of how you run your product teams. And then to complete that image of kind of building your resilience, it's also about the communities. And there's two types of communities I want to talk here. One is on the kind of communities of people who are in the same situation as you. That's a great support network because you can together complain about things that are hard. You can also exchange kind of strategies you've had in terms of tackling difficult issues. And also it gives you perspective because certain things you might be doing already really well versus others, and so it's also good to kind of compare yourself with people who are kind of playing in the same game as you. But then you also should go and meet people who don't play in the same game. Meet people around, who work in, really small, really nimble companies, people who are at the forefront of innovation in their game, and kind of, a community like today, because I think we have people from kind of different types of companies here. They will help you, so especially the people who work in a completely different environment, maybe make you dream of like, oh yeah, I'd love to be able to just recruit a different type of job role into my teams, for example. But they help you keep not only your expectations high, but actually push your expectations further and further, and kind of make sure that you have this, great understanding of where you could be in the future. And then, of course, change isn't about kind of thinking you're going to educate people and then eventually people will understand it and then they will do it. Clearly, that's not how things happen. We can only really change people by really showing examples and kind of showing by doing. And so this was one of the kind of a big tagline one of my product leaders used, and I thought it was kind of a bit weird. It was like, strategy is just to do stuff, but actually it's to get stuff out of the door and to prove that your team working in a different way can actually get to results. And getting trust amongst your stakeholders, amongst your sponsors is super important. So identifying teams that are in ideal conditions, so that's kind of a team that has sufficient budget to kind of be well enough staffed, I would say, but isn't in the eye of Sauron. So it isn't in the kind of focus of, the business leaders be like, where's this project going? It's kind of like on the side, and that's a kind of perfect place to kind of have a team demonstrate maybe other kind of doing things maybe not in a project way, and kind of iterating, testing, delivering faster, those kind of things. And then this team, get them to not only talk about the success that they are achieving, or kind of after 6 months, after 3 months being like, oh great, look how much we've increased conversion. Get them talking about how they got there. So this is something we try and do using our internal blogging tool, but this could be also done to the whole wide world if you want to, is talking about our process. So that's like, okay, our team has done a piece of discovery research. Here are all the things we found. And it's usually stuff you would just tell the team or maybe tell kind of your users, but actually having a blog post about it really helps us, well, one, have some collateral, and also kind of remind the team also of their successes, because their success isn't just achieving a thing, it's also kind of bringing in this new way of working. And so kind of talking about, kind of get the developers to write something. It doesn't have to be long, it's just something to talk about, maybe the technical strategy they've put in place, or a designer to talk about maybe a type of design sprint they've done, to talk about how they got there, so that you can share that also with your stakeholders. And it's probably not the post that will get the most views on the first kind of day, but you'll be able to go back to it over and over again and be like, oh, actually, this is how we've worked there. And look, this is also how we then achieve success. So don't underestimate the kind of power of talking about also your methods. And then the last one about getting stuff done is it's really to as a product leader, to realize your role as what I call a bigger poop umbrella. You know, it's about sheltering your team, protecting them from all the noise. Typically, the kind of noise that we deal with is that our financing and our budgeting processes, they still work in a project logic. I have explained it many times to finance, but I haven't gotten there yet. And so I have to I live in two worlds where I'm ensuring that we have the right kind of teams, and making sure that, you know, we have the lines that say, okay, we'll deliver this, and this is the type of people we'll need for this, and this, we'll deliver this, and yes, yes, yes. But keeping it sufficiently vague so that afterwards you can kind of adapt it in your roadmap, because as you're learning, you probably need to do something different. And kind of playing that kind of, doing that stretching, so that the teams have a fully staffed team with the right kind of people on there, and then have the liberty and autonomy to actually get the things done that, you know, and be able to also change course as you go. So, so that's what I think is a super crucial role of a product leader in this type of environment. And then finally, on collaboration. So early on, one of the quotes, it was like, oh, I have to explain my job all the time. And I think there's explaining your job and there's explaining your job. I've seen it happen a lot where product people come and try and kind of preach product ways of working. They're like, oh, we do this, and they use a certain type of vocabulary. It's less jarring, I find, in English. So when I give you examples, it might not be as stark, but typically most of my teams work in French, but they will still use vocabulary in English. So they'll talk about a discovery, they talk about kind of user stories. We don't translate these words, but for our stakeholders who are also francophones, they don't understand that vocabulary. They don't understand, or they don't understand what a scrum is. You know, they're like, I mean, they understand if they're in the rugby team, but that's it. So yeah, so it's about not only explaining what you do, but meeting the stakeholders in their own language, and also ensuring that you're explaining why you're doing things. I find it's particularly important for product people in this kind of environment to really understand the logic behind each of our different ceremonies and why we do things. So we don't just do a daily stand-up because that's what the manual says, because that's what everyone does, or because it's kind of a good way to kind of have my coffee in the morning. Really understand what's the value of this ceremony, and ensure that if you have other stakeholders with you, that you explain that value, and they explain, this is why we're here. And also, it will also help you have better daily stand-ups, I think. So it's kind of being really communicative about why you do things is really important. And then there's the finding an insider ally, which can be a bit of a surprising, or I don't mean it in the way that you might interpret it. So they're not necessarily people who get you, or who get what you do, or get what you want to do. They're people who are really friendly and open and helpful to you, and you know, and want to kind of get stuff done, but they don't maybe understand why you want certain things done, but they really understand the organization, and they really understand how financing works, the kind of meetings to be in, the kind of things to present, maybe the way to frame your slides, those kind of things. And finding that kind of person, they can come in all shapes of sizes or forms, like they can come from all sorts of disciplines. But finding a friendly person that can help you navigate the organization will be really, really helpful, especially in a leadership position, because otherwise, as I said, if you're just going with your usual modus operandi, you might just hit lots and lots of roadblocks, and you just don't understand why. And then finally, I think this is something that's really important to me in general about product managers, but I think in this context it's particularly important, is a mindset of curiosity and humility. particularly if we're working with business units that have ways of working that we might find a bit old school, we tend to kind of dismiss their expertise, dismiss what they can bring to us. But like, oh, well, you know, procurement, they have their ways of, you know, they have their legal jargon, and they always want to do things in a certain way, and they just don't understand. But actually, they do things for very specific reasons. So it's all about understanding where they're coming from, what are their incentives, what is their what are the power structures inside of their organizations, and kind of coming to it also with with questions and the humility to accept that, you know, you don't know everything about what you're trying to build, what your service is about. And their expertise might actually help you identify risks that you're not even thinking about. So yeah, that's a very quick overview of all the different kind of things I've accumulated over my kind of last 3 experiences. So I just want to recap on the things that I said. So I think it's super important to build your resilience by having your expectations really over the long term, using weak signals to keep you going, to keep that flame going, and kind of keep you energized, and finding your communities to also like nourish you but also support you, to kind of be okay that things aren't perfect right now. In terms of getting stuff done, is getting things out of the door is more important than changing everything at once. Telling the how of your success is just as important as telling the successes, and the importance of sheltering teams and kind of providing them with kind of air cover and space to get things done. And then in terms of collaboration, explaining your job but explaining it plainly. Finding insider allies in maybe surprising places. And then finally, going at it with a mindset of curiosity and humility. So that was me. Thank you very much. And I think we're going over to some questions.
Yes, right? Yes. I will start with a few questions that I had when preparing that talk with you. Maybe the first question that comes to mind when you talk about high expectations on the long term.
Yeah.
What is long term for you based on your experience?
It can, yeah. So. I mean, ideally, yeah, that's a tough question because it's probably not within a year. It might be within 2 years, within 3 years, depending on where you see your organization is going and how much support you have in terms of how it's transforming. But I think, and as I said, I think, you know, one day we'll be working like a team at Spotify, but today we're not. But then, you know, once we get 2-3 years down the line, and Spotify is no longer the ideal. There's someone else who's there. So obviously your high expectations are kind of always further, kind of you'll never get there, basically. So, but they're definitely long term. So I'm kind of thinking, you know, it's okay if you don't get there this year. It's okay you don't get there in 2 years. But actually, also a good point is to think about, you know, maybe going back and kind of realizing how far you've come as well. Because when you're always raising your bar, it can be a bit demotivating. So you need to regularly look back and be like, okay, yeah, I've already done this. Like, look at us now. Like for example, we managed to do a huge piece of transversal user research. We have this issue that we're working a lot in silos, and actually getting funding to kind of do a piece of research that kind of went across loads of products and helped us align people around opportunity spaces. That was a huge win, and then kind of influencing. And then we had some setbacks because then people were like, oh, well, you know, but I want to work on this and so on. But I think seeing those also kind of, okay, little glimpse of the future, being like, okay, so yeah, so I answered a bit more than your question, but yeah, so I would say kind of really, it's very much a kind of far away.
It's always an evolution, but really good to keep in mind that you review regularly your notes and your goals to see how far you've been already.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see. The second one I had was the poop umbrella concept for a product leader.
It's a polite way of saying it. The normal term is with an S.
Of course. I'm wondering for maybe some people in the room that are senior PMs that are wondering, okay, maybe my next step would be to become a product leader. What is still great in the role, when can you also feel kind of ready to take on that role, because indeed it's quite changing compared to what you've been doing as a senior PM. So can you give us a bit more about that? Yeah,
it's definitely not selling it well when I say you're just gonna act as in that role. Because I think there's a sort of expectations of what a kind of head of product or lead PM will do in an organization, and so I'll talk more about in our kind of context of large organizations, so it can be different, because you're like, I'll be coaching my team, I'll be helping them, and I'll just help them grow, and that's the kind of like idea that people have, and then they realize that the job is dealing with budgets, it's defending your ideas with stakeholders, it's refilling a billion slide decks to explain what your team is doing and where they're at, and that's kind of a bit surprising reality sometimes, but it's also necessary in that job of kind of protecting the team from the noise, because you have a responsibility to kind of make sure the organization knows where they're at so that they can do their job. And so that's why the kind of the sheltering element is really important. But then you also have the kind of growing your team, building them up, like we do that through, we have a sort of method where we have every 4 to 6 weeks we have team meetings where we do sport and we grow and we kind of discuss kind of common issues together. And so most of our product team, so just the product people, will get together and kind of do something like that together. And so that's the stuff I love about being a product leader. And then obviously I think in terms of your question of when you're ready, I think I used to think that as product people, going to a management role is super easy because you're already like managing a team. So you just manage, you're managing the team differently. You have the developers, designers, stuff, but you kind of know how to take responsibility. But then you realize that actually managing humans is a whole other ballgame. So I think I was a bit naive when I went into my first leadership role, because I didn't realize how much kind of more individual one-on-one support people required. But actually now I really love that about the role. But I think there's a lot to learn in that role. Okay. And I would really encourage people to do training on management. I think that has really, I think I did it way too late in my management journey, and I realized I could have done much better by my people beforehand. So I would say kind of taking all the good you do as a senior PM, for example, but also maybe getting interested in what kind of people management entails. Okay. And I do think that most organizations offer training. And we have this terrible tendency sometimes to offer training once you've been once you've been named a manager, and then by the time you enroll in the training, it's like 6 months down the line. So actually think about doing that training or kind of accessing kind of these things in advance. So training on people management is definitely a good investment. I think so. Yeah. I think if anything you're investing in training, I think. Yeah. Sure. Of course. I don't sell any management training, don't worry. All right. Maybe one last question from my side. You talked about the concept of insider ally. Yeah. How do you find those people really in the organization? How do you spot them? And I would even ask further, like, how do you in the end ensure that they are actually really helping you and not maybe because they want to help you but they don't really know how to do it in a certain way, it becomes counterproductive? Yeah, so when I say ally, I'm not necessarily thinking of someone who has tons of kind of organizational power or like a big role. It can be the kind of the finance person It can be the office manager. It can be someone who works as a project manager somewhere who's been in the organization for 15 years or something. So they come and they're kind of hard to spot. But I think what I value, and I don't want to sound really manipulative when I'm saying this, but there'd be people who know the organization and have seen different parts of it. I think that's really interesting, and they're also friendly. And if you combine those two, and then the rest you can kind of figure out. In the sense they're friendly, as in they want to help you. And they're happy to answer your questions of like, oh, I'm thinking of doing it this way. I'm thinking of it, because it's not necessarily your boss or a business stakeholder who will answer those kind of questions. So kind of branching out to other people in the organization can be a really good way. And I don't know whether they're really helping you. I think it's about seeing whether the advice that they give you also works for you.
Okay. So you don't have to specifically have to interact with them on a daily basis. I mean, they don't have to be someone close in your close circle.
No. So they could be like, like we have people, and that's quite specific about Decathlon, is that we have these like zigzag career evolutions, let's say, where people have gone from working in retail to working in supply to working in sports and so on. And so these are typically really interesting people because they've seen loads of ways of working. They know how a store works, for example, or those kind of things. And so kind of finding them. And it's not about them being kind of next to you all the time. It's more about, in you trying to achieve your goals, probably the way you've done it in another organization won't work here. And kind of figuring out, what are the ways that this organization works, especially when you're new. I think after a while you kind of get through it. But I've seen that both in governments, where it's super, there's bits that are super hierarchical, very, there's kind of legal aspects to it. But also to companies who've really evolved really organically over the years. So, you have a sort of official line of how things work, and then you have the reality. And I think these people will be able to guide you through it.
All right. Thanks, Chantal. Maybe the audience has some questions. There you go.
I just want to paraphrase. Does it mean that to summarize is to adapt to the culture of the company or the current culture? So is that right?
I think that's true. I haven't talked about culture. I think there is an important aspect of embracing the culture, not necessarily. Because I think there's difference about culture and ways of working. And I think making your kind of, if you're thinking, I want to really have product managers working here, but ways of working have been different. I think talking about it in the language that makes sense for the company and kind of integrates in the culture makes a lot of sense. So we're rethinking that right now in terms of, because taking, frameworks like, or things I've written by like Marty Kagan and so on, and thinking about, we've too much just relied on external literature. Right now we're thinking about how do we phrase that within our own way of talking about things and embed that maybe with stories from our own people, so that we kind of mix the two together. So the ways of working that we imagine with the Decathlon culture.
Yes, Alexander.
You were talking about that, unfortunately, project-based approach is gaining some popularity again.
Yes.
Do you have any explanation for why you think that is happening? Is there something we can do to counter that? Or, I
mean, I have my. I think there's something around profitability. I think there's or at least a tougher economic climate we've seen in the last couple of years, and therefore spending being reduced, and therefore trust being harder to get from people. So they want to kind of gain back control, and I think project ways of working help also gain control. But there's, I think, a second trend in there is that we try to make everything a product. And by actually not actually making it a product. We still have people who have digital product manager as their job title, but really they're doing lots of project management because the circumstances that they're in are just like that. And I think so So I think we see both of that, where we're kind of facing the reality of like, maybe this is something we need to manage differently, and maybe there's a place for one and for the other. And it's not about like project is all bad, because there's actually things like rollouts. There's certain things you can't just do as a product. So I think they're so kind of not. I think also not opposing them will be something that we'll see more of. Like we're trying at the moment to redefine what do we want to make working in a project way, and what do we want as real like kind of product ways of working.
You're good, yeah.
I was wondering, how is product strategy done in your role?
Yeah, it depends on what level. At the moment, so we are really, so I didn't say, so Decathlon, we're about 5,000 people in digital. So there's no one product strategy, obviously. And so we're divided in different domains. And so, for example, you have an e-commerce domain. And so e-commerce will develop its product strategy together by understanding the needs of all the countries. So we're in about 70 countries. So understanding kind of what are the challenges here, and then kind of developing their strategy kind of based on kind of all the input. And I think e-commerce in that is a great example of where this works really well, because we have it's a place we have lots of data, we have lots of customer interactions, and we have sufficiently enough countries so that there's not one country that can dictate what you're going to do. So that's where things are done in the more classical way, with cascading OKRs and those kind of things. We have other parts of the business where maybe you're working with one business unit and all your products are internal, and that's where your product strategy is kind of more thinking, is more the product leader. So it can be the director or a group PM working with the business leader together and figuring out what the strategy is together. So it's not really a pure product strategy, it's just kind of thinking, okay, maybe like on I was working on our content tools, for example. So thinking about, where do we want content to go, and how do we both work towards that? And so kind of much more co-writing that strategy, and then kind of defining what are your goals underneath that. So your relationship with the business is completely different than in like a very customer-facing product. Is that, yeah?
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea.
You mentioned transversal user research.
Yeah.
Can you say more, and if you have any techniques or tips?
Yeah, actually it was, so maybe I'll tell you about what we're looking at, so I'll make it concrete. In my previous team, we're managing what we call a PIM, which is product information management. So it's all the product cards where basically our sports teams put in all the information about the product. So this bike is red, it has this size, etc. And it's great for going outdoors, so you have all the kind of the marketing speech, but also all the data that goes with it. And that will then structure our sites, but it also goes in our shops, and it also goes in like our logistics centers. So because you need to know what's in the box that you're carrying usually, or packing things for e-commerce, for example. So we were just one tiny piece of the puzzle, because we're only the place where you put in that information. But we also get lots of information from other tools, and we're sending it to loads of different channels. And so we knew that there was something wrong with the way we manage product information. Like lots of people were frustrated with how it was happening. And so I managed to find a little pocket of budget to kind of get a pair of user researchers to map the end-to-end process of what it looks like. Because what was happening is that in this kind of chain, we have about kind of 15 to 20 different product teams involved, and they're all in different parts of the organization. So what tends to happen is you know the person before you know the person after you, but you don't really know what's going on beyond. And we knew that the problems that our customers were experiencing on the e-commerce side were being created really, really early on, but we couldn't quite trace how this was happening. So by being able to map the kind of the experience it wasn't really an experience, because you don't have a user from end to end, but kind of the journey of that product information and how it was being transformed and enriched and then remodified and where it was going and so on. and the kind of people that intervened at each of these steps, well, that helped us kind of drive more of a kind of common strategy between these teams. Because basically what's happening is that they're all in each of their different domains, and they look up to their leader to say, okay, so our strategy is this, and actually aligning people on common goals across these was really hard. And so by mapping this, it kind of helped kind of create a dialogue and more trust between the teams. So yeah, is that the kind of advice? Well, we're happy to talk about it in more detail.
Yep, go ahead, Flora.
So from what I was told, Decathlon is very heavy on sort of user research and innovation on a hardware perspective, the products that they turn out. And so I was surprised of the topic of your talk, specifically for digital, because I would assume that it sort of translated automatically to the digital suite as well. That's not entirely the case, or?
Yeah, I would say it depends. I think as I said, there's bits of the organization where we're, where we're extremely data-driven and where we have access to lots of customer-facing information, user testing, research, etc., interaction in the shops and those kind of things. But then we also have a reality of lots of internal products where that's not the case at all. Where we're much further away from having access to the right data or being able to kind of do things because we've been in the past so much dictated how to build the products by the different parts of the business. So it's interesting, the question around the kind of physical products kind of way of working, and there's so much commonalities actually in terms of how we do that, because a typical team that develops a sport product, so like my shoe here, you have a product engineer, you have a product designer, and you have a product manager. And that's why we call us digital product managers, because product managers work on physical products. And it's that trio that will create the products in a kind of iterative cycle. But at the same time, they're on a time to market that's a bit different than in digital. So typically, a product that is an evolution, but isn't too much of an innovation, takes about 18 months from idea to launch. A real innovation, like you saw on this, I think I had the Easy Breath, which is the mask, yeah. I think that's an innovation that probably took 6-7 years. So, because, I mean, also masks, so there's so much testing and security going on. So I think that also happens. I think maybe we had also the 2-second tent. I don't have in mind how much that took, but similarly, is way more kind of iteration before it actually goes to market and goes in front of customers. So our digital teams have the advantage that we're able to iterate and learn much faster, where our teams are having to do more qualitative research. But we do have a co-creation platform, by the way, so I'll plug that, which is open to anyone who wants to start testing products, and it's open all over the world. And we're looking for lots of people outside France. So yeah, if you look for Decathlon co-creation, they kind of regularly do studies and kind of do tests with people to kind of test the product so that the sport teams can, kind of get feedback. But we typically, like our sports teams, what's really good about them is that they're located in the place that the sport is done. So typically our Quechua team, who does like all the tents and kind of hiking stuff, they're based in the Alps. So they're kind of in the middle of their environment. We have the people who are working on sailing or in swimming are all on the coast. We have a badminton team in China. We have a futsal team in Portugal. So it's kind of where that sport is, where you have lots and lots of people using it and you can kind of interact lots with people. And so that kind of being close to your customer, I think, is something that does translate in our teams. In digital as well. So the kind of whole understanding how that touches your end user is something that's quite present in our conversations. And specifically, if you join the company, you work for a week in a shop to kind of learn also what it's like to kind of, the kind of questions people have, the kind of things people are looking for. So that I think also helps to build our kind of empathy for the customer, even if your product specifically, and it does something that contributes to this, but you kind of see how you're adding value to them.
You did mention that Decathlon was like in 70 countries, I guess. Where do you find and how do you find the right balance between like replying to market-specific demands and on the other side, like having a product organization, especially in the context in the digital sector where like digital transformation is always seen as a burning platform to streamline the process and probably to harmonize the tool.
Yeah. We're going through a process where we gave a lot of autonomy and kind of decision-making power to the local market. And that also translates in the brand. So I think we spoke about that maybe a year ago or so, where we reduced the number of brands. So basically we went kind of like, let's expand to all countries, to all brands, to all sports. And now we're in a phase where we're kind of dieting that down, because what we realize is also, well, where you have too much autonomy, actually, when you have something in central and then you have lots of teams locally building stuff on top, well, when you try and release something, it's a nightmare. Or when you try and do some A/B testing, you've got to have so many variables that it's really, really hard to do. So right now we're more in a process of re-standardizing, specifically on e-com, to kind of maybe simplify that kind of approach. But I think what we're thinking, we're not kind of going all kind of one monolith, one solution for all markets. So it's more about kind of, okay, there's something in the European markets that might be common, there's something in the Asian markets that may be common. So also kind of thinking about, more in terms of going all local or going all global, kind of thinking about how do we strike that balance between the two. And I think we're more in that dynamic at the moment, depending on what types of products you are. I think there are certain things where, like for example on product data, we're very much on the global side and there's little leeway we can give the countries, because we can't have them change the data about a product, for example. But on other things, I think especially customer facing stuff, for sure. I think I think also in terms of and that's the same with our brands. Kind of the products that maybe we have products made specifically for India, we have products being made specifically for China, organized by the local market. So I think with the size of portfolio of countries we have, it is a particular challenge. So right now we're in the middle of striking that balance, I would say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. We for a moment talked about releases and that they're being held back by the local teams.
Yeah.
How fast are your release cycles? Because from my experience, especially with non-digital and older, it's often not daily, definitely not continuous. So.
Yeah. I think it really depends on the teams. We have many teams who've moved to very, very regular, like kind of every day, every couple of days. So I think typically I would say on the engineering side, we're pretty good. I think it's where we have sort of legacy tech. Typically I was talking about SAP, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's basically like kind of it's extremely powerful, but also to change it and to even upgrade a version, it takes a lot of time and a lot of coordination. So for those kind of teams, it's been a lot harder to kind of go to faster iterations. But I think we've done a lot of kind of putting in lots of standards in engineering that have been really cascaded down to all the teams in digital that have really changed the way we do things, and that give us the liberty. So I would say on that we're actually doing pretty good. I think I always use e-com because that's our kind of where things are really working really well. But I think I'm seeing that also on lots of our internal products, where teams have pretty modern ways of working, and also we have a lot of standards in place in terms of the tech you can use, kind of languages you can use, so that we don't have lots of products of like, well, this is developed in this is developed in this is developed in this, and these have really helped us kind of homogenize our practices. So yeah, I would say it's definitely an area where I think we're ahead of some of our peers who are kind of a similar size of company.
Yeah.
You talked about show by doing and the strategies that you show that your team can deliver.
Yeah.
How do you introduce change or to convince your team members to change their ways, or to introduce change into your team itself?
Yeah, that's interesting, especially because we do also have people who've moved from, I was saying, or we would say, we put some certain projects into products, and then now suddenly you're a product manager, and you've done like a one-day training, and now you're a product manager. I think that changes. I haven't talked about that at all. I think is also just as hard. I think what helps me in terms of specifically the product manager, so I don't know so much about the other disciplines, but having a group of PMs who with kind of mixed backgrounds. So I had people who kind of came from the organization, they were more from on the project side, they were managing external softwares actually. And next to that I had people who are coming from other companies, some scale-ups and things. And so for the change not to just come from me as their manager, but kind of trying to get the group to learn together, and for kind of people who are coming from the outside to bring kind of practices and product, but also the people who are from inside the company to upskill the people who are coming from outside on the company culture, on the company ways of working, and also on kind of the processes and things like that. So kind of so that kind of having those kind of mixed teams, or sometimes bringing external consultants in as well, that can also help to kind of bring everyone's level up together. So I would say that's probably the kind of the way I've seen it. I've done it so far.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll take two more questions and then...
Yeah, I think I saw yours as well. So.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could give some tips about the stakeholder management that you touched on a little bit, about like keeping it vague enough that the timeline and the approach can shift, but still like what they can expect.
Yeah.
Because you were saying, there's this kind of stretching technique. I would like to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's being very creative with your words, and I think like being specific enough for finance to think, especially I think it's more like, finance and stakeholders, right? For them to think, okay, that sounds like something good. But also so that behind that you have that kind of leeway. So I don't know if I have specifics like that come to my mind of like, but I think, it does help to kind of really, kind of play with the words or use words that can be like, kind of make you believe it's a solution, but really it's a problem. We had like this, I think when you can kind of phrase it as a problem, I think then it's the easiest way. Like for example, we have a topic around how do we reduce risk around ensuring that our wording on that we meet compliance standards on the wording on our product content. So for example, there are certain things you can say in a certain way and not in another. For example, on environmental standards, you can't just say, hey, this product is great, it saves the environment, so there's certain things you have to say in a way that is really evidence-based and things. And so to tackle that problem, we're trying to implement and or we're in the process of implementing an AI solution to help us identify risks around kind of maybe talking about environmental standards, maybe not in the way that they should be talked about, and kind of alerting the user, because basically we have a team that then goes over it, like the compliance team, and we want to make sure that the teams writing the content in the first place don't do that. And so it's interesting because I kept talking about this project in terms of, okay, this is our, it's kind of reducing risky content, or, and then the stakeholders still come back to me. So will it do this, or will it stop things, or will it? And I was like, I don't know what the solution will be. I mean, we're talking about it in 6 months, and can we agree that this is the problem? So and so it was, and every time I managed to get them back, I'm like, yes, we agree that is the problem, and that's the problem we want to solve. So, and then they have kind of confidence again in that. So by kind of turning the conversation the more you can into kind of outcomes, or problems, I think that really helps. But otherwise it's creative language always helps as well. I would say.
All right, last question. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering at your company, how do you decide in the product organization whether you're going to build the internal product or go external?
Yeah. As far as I know, we don't really have a standard method of doing this. In the type of products I was working on, it's a very pertinent question because we have specifically on product information management or something where there's a lot of kind of market kind of tools out in the market. I think there's the general kind of conversation we've had around that was around where do we want to be, or what's our uniqueness, and where do we want to be excellent? Because you know that with an external tool, you'll get to 80% of where you want to be, because you'll be locked into like the way the tool works, and you'll be limited by that. So thinking about, okay, we want to be excellent on this, and that's really crucial to our business model, versus this is where we can probably be okay. And it works. And actually it's, because I think there's no argument that one is cheaper than the other, because really, I don't think it is. You know, it's like, yeah, the license fee is something you can kind of clearly see, okay, that's quite expensive, but actually the kind of, if you're building it internally, it's the cost that is sometimes much greater. But it doesn't look like that at the beginning, because it's kind of much more, kind of builds over time, and then you have tech debt and all those things. So for me, it's definitely not a question of like the cost, but I think more about your positioning and whether you want to be this to be so specific and so adaptable to your kind of customer journeys or your kind of internal processes, or not, basically.
All right. Thank you very much, Chantal.
Yeah, thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that many insights on how it actually really works inside. That was super nice. So that is the end of the first phase of the Product Apéro. The pizzas are on their way. Help yourselves with snacks, drinks, beers, and so on. There will be a new edition in March. What is the date, Camille?
19th.
March 19th, and it's about ethics and technology.
Yes.
Exactly. So pretty trending topic. I hope to see you there.